Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The government is poised for another Commons vote on whether the RAF should bomb so-called Islamic State positions in Syria. The trouble is, of course, that Russia are already there, and the possibilities of an accidental confrontation leading who knows where are terrifying. Michael Fallon, the Secretary of State for Defence, is with me. Is it still your intention or your hope that RAF jets will be flying across Syrian airspace before too long?
Well, the logic is inescapable. ISIL, that is a huge threat to this country, to the stability of Iraq, to the stability of the whole region, has carried out barbarous acts. ISIL is run from northeast Syria, where Assad has not been in control for a couple of years. It's run from northeast Syria. Its command and control is there, its logistics, its supply routes into Iraq. And the others in the coalition have been striking at those targets. They'd like us to take part, but we don't yet have parliamentary authority to do so.
Meanwhile, the Russians have arrived with ground-to-air missiles and fighter jets and who knows what. Surely the dangers of an accidental confrontation in the skies over Syria are very real.
Well, they've arrived with all sorts of things. They've arrived with some tanks, with artillery, with a cruiser offshore. And what they're doing is propping up the Assad regime, making the resolution of all this more difficult. They're prolonging the conflict, and civilians are being killed. The RAF strikes are done to very strict rules of engagement. They've been striking in Iraq for a year, where so far there have been no civilian casualties. The Russians have been at it in Syria for a couple of weeks, and independent reports estimate they've killed several hundred people already.
And the Russians have also, in effect, closed the skies over Syria or warned us off. Will RAF jets, as has been reported, be carrying air-to-air missiles to protect themselves?
First of all, they've not closed off the skies over Raqqa and northeast Syria, where operations are going on against ISIL. Indeed, that's one of the criticisms, that most of the Russian strikes, over 80% of them, have been in areas where ISIL isn't even present. In fact, have been against groups that have been opposing Assad, which is simply making this conflict worse. But our tornadoes, of course, are not flying over Syria at the moment. So this issue about whether or not they're carrying missiles doesn't arise over Syria.
But may well arise in the future if this Commons vote goes through. Doesn't it make it much harder to get the Commons approval, given the fact that Putin's people are in place there already?
No, I don't think we should let Russia divert us for a moment from our focus against ISIL. Let's forget that ISIL beheaded British hostages. They were behind the slaughter of 30 British holidaymakers on a beach in Tunisia. They've been killing Christians, they've been killing gays, they've been carrying out unspeakable acts of brutality. They're a very direct threat to the peace in the Middle East, and they're a direct threat to us here in the United Kingdom. And we should not be diverted from by Russia from tackling ISIL harder.
Now, of course, what Putin would say, we also want to get rid of ISIL. We are fighting with you, is what he would say.
But he isn't. He isn't. Most of his bombing, and he's been using unguided bombs, which is why so many civilians are being killed. Most of his bombing is taking place in areas that ISIL have nothing to do with. They're over on the western side of Syria.
Our strategy depends upon getting rid of Assad. You've said again and again, this man is a butcher who's killed even more people than ISIL. He is a very, very dangerous and evil man. He must be out of the equation. Now that he has the support of Russia, he's not going to go anytime soon, is he?
Well, I think Russia...
In the real world, I mean...
Well, if Russia wants to help here, Russia needs to be part of getting a new political solution for Syria, working with us and other Western governments, us, the United States, Germany and France, to put in place in Syria a new government that is properly representative, in which Assad will play no part.
Why would they? They have stolen a huge march in all of us. They're there, they're doing what they want. They've got a very clear strategy, and there's nothing we can do about it.
Well, I think we can make Russia see that Assad is not part of Syria's future. He only has control of a quarter of the country of Syria. He's lost control over his own people, which is why he's having to barrel bomb them. And we want Russia to come and work with us on a political solution for Syria that will end all this fighting.
I just can't see why he would do it. He seems to have won already.
No, he wants to try and preserve his relationship with the Syrian state, but the Syrian state is collapsing. It's very fragile now, which is why I think he intervened.
Yes.
But Assad cannot be part of Syria's future, and Russia really ought to be working with us to get a better and more comprehensive government in place that will bring an end to this bloodshed.
And just returning to where we started, you are not worried about the dangers of some kind of accidental confrontation with the Russians if we go to war in Syria?
Well, I am worried, yes. I mean, when you have this activity, you've seen on the Turkish border, which is a NATO border, you've seen incursions into Turkish airspace, and obviously there is the danger of accidents, of incidents taking place that inflame the tension there.
But it's still worth risking that.
Well, we have to deal with ISIL. That is our focus. It is ISIL that is a threat to the democratic government of Iraq, but is also a threat to this country, and we mustn't be diverted from that.
Now, of course, for an awful lot of people, one of the reasons for being involved there certainly is the huge refugee crisis. Church of England bishops in very large numbers, I don't know what the collective for a diocese or a synod or whatever, an entire synod of bishops,
A cloister
of bishops has written to the government saying, take many more refugees, take another 30,000 or so, please, and don't keep ignoring us. What's your message to the bishops?
Well, no country in Europe is doing more in Syria than we are. We're spending £1 billion helping the refugees in the refugee camps in Syria, and now we've announced that we'll take 20,000, 5,000 a year for the rest of this Parliament, which is a number we think we can reasonably accommodate, make sure they feel welcome, that they're given housing and the chance of getting a job here. But the real issue is out in Syria. It's getting other countries in Europe to contribute more to the feeding of refugees in the camps and making sure their conditions are alleviated.
So the message to the bishops is, in effect, no dice.
No, the message to the bishops is nobody is doing more than we are out there in Syria to help the refugees in their camps.
The refugee crisis, in a larger sense, has completely changed the tone of the debate, I think, over the EU.
Yes.
The Prime Minister is going to come up, I think, next month with his negotiation positions in a public way. But we also read that there's going to be a cull of Eurosceptics from the government in the Telegraph today. First of all, are you worried? Are you one of those Eurosceptics waiting for the cull?
Well, first of all, I think we're all Eurosceptics now. I don't see any Euro fanatics around the cabinet table. We're all part of the reform commitment we made in the manifesto to get a better deal out of the European Union. And I think David Cameron was pretty prescient to make the movement of peoples and the claiming of benefits one of the key areas where we need to see reform.
Would it be a bad move on his part to remove some of his European critics from the government?
I don't know where you get this stuff about
Daily
culling and critically. We are all sceptics about Europe. We all want to see reform in Europe. We're all thoroughly behind the Prime Minister in his reform agenda.
And do you think that the refugee crisis has changed the terms of debate in an important way?
Yes, I do think other European leaders are now beginning to realise that the original European construct, that anybody can move anywhere, that we were very wise to opt out of the Schengen arrangements, and that we are right to pursue what is in our best national interest. And one of the changes that David Cameron will be arguing for is there should be more of those rights to protect us against the kind of creeping federalism that we've seen.
I've mentioned the Telegraph several times. For their front page is a very, very interesting story today about the cost to British taxpayers of foreign combatants, including Taliban bomb makers and so forth, actually going to the British courts to sue the British Army for abuse of their human rights. That is something which presumably outrages you. But the question is, what are you going to do about it?
Well, we have a manifesto commitment to do something about it, to strengthen our defences against some of these legal claims, which turn out to be completely bogus, cost us a lot of money, comes out of the defence budget, and hinders the operational effectiveness of our troops out in very dangerous places like Afghanistan. And I'll be putting proposals to my colleagues soon as to how we implement that manifesto commitment.
Now, we read also the British Bill of Human Rights is going to be fast-tracked by the government. Meanwhile, would you consider abrogating from the Human Rights Convention while we are at war to stop this happening?
Well, we're looking at a number of ways of better protecting our troops from these
that be
kind
one
of
of them?
bogus claims. Well, we're looking at all these things. There's a manifesto commitment to deal with this particular problem, which is costing us, millions of pounds, which would be better spent on better equipment for our troops.
OK, so it's an option. Let me move on to something else. Jeremy Corbyn Corbyn has made it very clear that he would not press the nuclear button under any circumstances. A big vote coming up in the House of Commons, I think, early next year on the so-called gateway vote for Trident. And you believe that there is a new nuclear age. Can you explain a little bit about why you think it's still important for us to be spending quite so much money on a nuclear weapon, which Peter Hitchens described as being a Cold War weapon?
Well, it isn't a Cold War weapon. It's a weapon we use every day. Every night, 24 hours a day, we are deterring people, and there are 17,000 nuclear weapons out there. We can't be sure in the 2030s, the 2040s, the 2050s, that some rogue state mightn't use nuclear weapons against us. Every government, Labour and Conservative, has continued our nuclear deterrent. The 4 nuclear submarines we have at the moment are going to become obsolescent by the end of the 2020s. It takes over 10 years to build a new submarine, so we have to take this decision now to renew our deterrent for the 30s, 40s and 50s. And I would appeal to moderate Labour MPs to put national security actually ahead of party interest here and come and join us in renewing the deterrent in the way that all previous Labour governments have done.
Speaking of national security, how worried are you about the Chinese cyber threat and what can be done about it?
Well, cyber threats are out there. We're spending a lot of money protecting our critical national infrastructure, power stations, the grid and so on, from cyber attacks. We're protecting the centre of government from cyber attacks. We're spreading good practice amongst our companies so they aren't commercially damaged. There is a threat of cyber, but we're responding to it. 71
of your colleagues apparently believe they're a threat because of the tax credit policy. It's becoming incredibly unpopular in the country. There is a kind of build-up of anger about it. Is this something the government has to look at again?
Well, I noticed that Labour didn't quite answer your question this morning as to whether they would reverse the tax credit
I think in the end she
changes.
said she would, yes.
Well, that's £4 billion you will have to find from somewhere. But you need to look at the tax credits.
This is a policy that is going to be, could be electorally disastrous for your
We need
party.
to look at it as a whole. Taking money out of one pocket in high taxation and recycling and give it back to people in the form of credits. 9 out of 10 families receiving credits, including MPs, is not very sensible. We need to focus welfare on where it's needed most and move our country to where you keep more of your earnings, lower tax and lower welfare.
Not much consolation for those people getting those letters at Christmas about it. As a constituency MP, have you noticed this is a problem?
Well, nobody's had these letters yet. You need to look at the overall earnings, including the extra free childcare people are going to be getting, the increase in the tax allowance, the big increase in coming in with the national living wage. That's an extra £20 a week. You'll need to look at each family in the round to see who's better off. But we're all better off if we move to a system where we have lower welfare and lower taxation.
Mr. Fallon, thank you very much indeed for joining us today. That's all we've got time for.